As I lay in bed, leafing through my old hardcover copy of Talking to Heaven, a tickle on my wrist. Some sort of beetle the size of an apple seed, flat and brown, crawled up my arm as if out for an evening stroll. I shrieked and blew it onto the nightstand. I'm guessing it's because I've lived in the city my whole life that I've never been a fan of bugs. Spiders hunched in dark corners, bloated worms rotting on the sidewalk, fruits flies buzzing around the sink in a cloud of filth. I know insects are part of nature, but so are viruses. Just because something's natural doesn't mean it's good. I snatched a tissue from the box, draped it over the thing as it tried to scurry off the edge of the nightstand, and smashed it with the spine of my book. Wadding up the tissue, I flushed it down the toilet. And flushed again. Back in bed, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But an internet factoid kept creeping into my mind. How the average person supposedly swallows 8 spiders a year in their sleep. Throat scratchy, I scurried to the bathroom for a glass of water and an Ambien, then burrowed under the covers and fell asleep. The next morning, I awoke having all but forgotten about the encounter. I held a session across town, browsed the aisles at a used bookstore, and spent my usual quiet evening at home. This night, with a fillet of salmon, pint of mint chocolate chip, and a Twilight Zone marathon on the Sci-Fi Channel. 3 days later, while stripping my bed sheets, another of the disgusting bugs bumbled across my mattress like a cursor on a computer screen. Without thinking, I brushed it on the floor with the back of a hand and stomped, mashing it into the carpet with the heel of my slipper. I lifted my foot to make sure it was dead. Motionless, it stuck to my sole. I took off the slipper and brought it over to the computer, typed indoor insects into the search engine, and sifted through a nightmare gallery of cockroaches, pill bugs, and centipedes before I had a match. A wave of nausea swept through me. It was a goddamn bedbug. Weren't bedbugs for messy people? But my apartment was spotless, which meant they were coming from someplace else, probably that meathead down the hall, the stink of a locker room seeping out from under his door. I did more research and learned the nasties had become increasingly common over the past few decades, for whatever reason. The only good news was that, although they could bite, sucking blood like mosquitoes and ticks, they weren't disease carriers. Some consolation. Though it was almost midnight, I called my landlord, demanded that he send an exterminator the next morning, and hung up before he could make any of his excuses. I yanked off the bed sheets and shoved the mattress on the floor, but didn't find any more of the bastards. A couple of Ambien later, I curled up on the living room couch under the Afghan, and, scratching the occasional imaginary itch, watched I Dream of Jeannie reruns until I fell asleep. A ring woke me late the next morning. It took a few confused seconds to figure out it was my doorbell. Sadly, it had been that long since I'd had a visitor. I jolted up from the couch and raced to the door against the peephole. A man in a red and blue uniform stood there. The exterminator told me I'd need to vacate the premises for the next 6 hours, which was perfect since I had session. Anyway, I got dressed and left, relieved to be escaping the infestation, if only for the day. My client was a tiny, quivering Lithuanian widow whose sprawling Victorian smelled like onions. She wanted to speak with her husband, gone for almost 20 years. Her cold, dry hand clutching mine, I tried to establish contact for nearly 2 hours, but to no avail. The spirit world is elusive, I told her with a shrug. We can try again tomorrow. When I asked for my modest fee, she grunted up from her chair, shuffled to the closet, and came back gripping a broom. Jabbering in a foreign tongue, the awful woman literally swept me from her kitchen, down the hallway, and out the front door, which the ingrate slammed in my face. Teeth clenched against my rage. I called a cab to take me to the pharmacy so I could refill my old Xanax prescription, which thankfully was still good. I popped one on the way out the door and, calmer than I'd felt in days, strolled the sunny sidewalks for some window shopping. To distract my mind away from my vermin-filled home, I killed a couple of hours at a coffee shop, sipping a latte and browsing tabloids. A scruffy teenager played an acoustic guitar in the corner, fingers scrabbling over the strings like a daddy-long-legs. It might have been the amplifier, but when he sang a second voice in the background, faint and trembling, wove in off-key harmonies. Before long, 6 hours had passed, and it was time to go back to my apartment. But I didn't want to. I dubbed myself from my purse and called Ariane. "Can you hold on a sec, hun?" Ariane said. I leaned against a lamppost, phone against my ear, listening to roaring laughter and what might have been a brass section. "Okay, I'm back." "So good to hear your voice," I blurted, tearing up, happy to be speaking to the only person in the city I could honestly call a friend. First, and you won't believe this, I found a bedbug in my apartment. An actual bedbug. So, of course, it got the place fumigated. "Really?" Ariane said, barely audible over blaring trumpets. And then one of my clients wouldn't even. "Don't you dare," Ariane screeched in my ear. I held the phone away from my face. "What? Not you, hon. Someone else," Ariane said. "Know what, babe? This really isn't a good time. I'm in New York. With Gil." She whispered the last part. I didn't know who Gil was, but figured he had to be Ariane's latest paramour. Sugar daddies, she called them, which she explained wasn't sex work because she chose them. "I'm really having a hard time here," I almost sobbed. "Could I maybe stay at your—" Ariane sighed irritably. "I can barely hear you. How about you fill me in when I get back? Okay? Love ya." A smacking kiss, and she hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand beside the swarming traffic, berating myself for expecting anything at all, from that selfish creature. When I got back to the apartment, the exterminator was gone. The smell wasn't bad, just a faint trace of something metallic. I opened the windows to let in the cool, early autumn air, switched on the ceiling fan, and lit a few vanilla candles. My heart crammed in my throat. I tiptoed into the bedroom as if sneaking up on an unfaithful lover. Holding my breath, I inspected the top of the mattress, flipped it over. Reluctantly, I knelt down to look under the bed. All clean. I let out a sigh. Every day for the next week, I scrutinized my bed, carpet, dresser drawers, and closets for signs of the invaders. Nothing. They were gone. I could relax again. For mornings later, I woke to find one of the horribles squatting on my pillow, inches from my face like a mint left behind by housekeeping. Gagging, I carried the pillow at arm's length over to the balcony, sliding the torn screen door open with my foot, then tossed the whole thing over the railing to watch it plummet 17 stories to the street below. Suddenly exhausted, I crumpled into a ball on the cement. I cried a little. The exterminator came back that afternoon. "Sorry," he said with a sheepish smile. "Must have missed some eggs on the first sweep. Mind if I take a look? That's your job, isn't it?" I snipped, not about to be taken advantage of again. Sliding a flashlight from a hip holster, he went into the bedroom while I vacuumed the living room carpet for the second time that day. After maybe 10 minutes, I noticed him standing there looking at me. I shut off the vacuum. "I didn't find anything," he said, almost accusingly. "Must not have looked very hard." I shot back. "Sure, there were bed bugs." Annoyed now, I clenched the handle of the vacuum. "Positive. There's no sign of them." He scowled, as if blaming me for his own subpar work. "You think I'm making this up?" He paused a bit too long before answering, which made me furious. "I don't know, lady." He shrugged. "If your landlord's paying for it, I'll bomb the place again." Satisfied, I nodded. "Make sure you get them all this time." I spat and fled the apartment to catch a film. The next week, I discovered 2 of the monsters on my headboard. The room swam for a moment before I got a hold of myself. Then I punched each of them dead with a bare fist, blood trickling from my split knuckle. On my hands and knees, I inspected the carpet. What if they were breeding under there? I crawled to the corner to see if I could pull up an edge. No, but there were a few tiny brown turds. For Christ's sake, not only did I have bed bugs, mice were setting up shop too. I must have sounded like a madwoman when I called my slumlord, as he kept telling me to settle down, that he couldn't understand what I was saying. I calmed myself enough to insist he send over another exterminator right away, or I'd burn the place to the ground. Needless to say, I took a double dose of Xanax. By noon, a new exterminator in a brown jumpsuit showed up. and I checked into a 4-star hotel. Despite my meager bank account, I needed to feel clean, if only for a night. You better believe I scoured every inch of that room to make sure it was pristine before I laid down on the ivory comforter. I slept okay despite the occasional grunt, groan, or sigh from the bathroom, like someone relieving himself, startling me awake a few times. My phantom urinator aside, I was comfortable in the plush and immaculate room and in no rush to head back home. I ended up staying for 3 nights, which cost almost $1,000, part of a good month's income. And it hadn't been a good month. Finally, nowhere left to hide, I trudged back to my apartment, dread scalding my insides as if I'd swallowed a pot of hot soup. I unlocked the door and sniffed the air, encouraged by the strong metallic stink. Chewing my lower lip, I marched straight into the bedroom. I'm proud to say I didn't make a peep when I found 5 of the sons of bitches cavorting on a nightstand. One at a time, I crushed them between my fingers and smeared their carcasses against the wall as a warning to the others. Obviously, getting rid of the wretched beasts was beyond the ability of some rip-off exterminator. Like everything else, it was going to be up to me. I dry swallowed another couple of Xanax. Back on the internet, I spent hours reading up on the crawling freaks, eventually clicking on a page with close-up photos of insects that looked like but weren't bedbugs. A cousin of bedbugs, bat bugs, lived in caves and fed on the blood of roosting bats. I thought back to the poop I'd found in the corner. Could it have been from a bat instead of mouse? Had one found its way into the apartment through my torn screen door, maybe bugs hitching a ride on its vein of wings? I did some more research, learned how there were over 1,000 species of the hideous flying rats, how they were supposed to be so great because they pollinated flowers and ate mosquitoes, and how millions of them are dying from some fungus that grew on their faces. Good riddance. As the night grew late, I found myself on a website about vampire bats, the South American species that drank cow's blood, along with the occasional sleeping humans. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of Casper, my childhood kitty, twining around my legs. Except when I bent down to pet him, a torrent of yellow maggots spilled out of his empty eye sockets and piled in a squirming mass around my ankles. I woke drenched in sweat, ran to the bathroom, stripped off my nightgown, and examined my entire body for bites. All clean, false alarm. Curious what the dream meant, I logged on to occultopedia.com, which explained how cats could be familiars for vampires. I laughed out loud. Still, for no other reason than to occupy my mind, I kept reading and learned that familiars didn't have to be cats. They could be any sort of creature. Like insects, I wondered? Yes, I'm a medium who was born with the ability to speak to the dead. That doesn't mean I believed in vampires. I turned off the computer, checked my sheets and pillows. All clear, thank heavens. Took 2 Xanax and 2 Ambien and shut off the light. I woke again in the middle of the night, scratching my neck. Hit the light, flung off my nightgown mid-sprint to the bathroom to stare at my pale, goosebumped flesh in the mirror. Eyes blurry from sleep, it took me a few seconds to make sure it was real. Lifting my chin to get a better look, I traced a finger over a pair of red spots on my jugular vein. The bites, 2 inches apart, almost looked like fawn marks. Dizzy, I sat down hard on the closed toilet lid. I'm not naive, but years of communicating with the dead taught me to have an open mind. If there are lost souls among us yearning for contact, then are the undead really that much of a stretch? Clearly not. I finally accepted. It was 3 in the morning, but I had to tell the world what I'd uncovered. I called Ariane, but of course it went to voicemail. I rushed over to the computer and, typing in a frenzy, dashed off emails to the local TV, newspaper, and radio outlets explaining my revelation. How it's not only bats that could be a vampire's familiar, but bat bugs too. How the bats find their way inside a home, carrying the bugs, which siphon off the victim's blood and crawl back to their master to feast. After all, if you're a hungry vampire, why go to the trouble of a restaurant when you can get home delivery, lying in bed, in coffin, as you pop one blood-filled insect after another into your mouth like bonbons? I implored the journalists to do their jobs for once and report on what was happening before it was too late. I shut the computer and paced around my apartment, smacking the side of my head, trying to get the thoughts to flow. I had to accept that, even if the authorities got involved, it wouldn't be in time to save me. As always, I was on my own. I scratched the bites on my neck until they bled. Obviously, it was pointless to try to stop the bat from coming in. The bugs were already there, breeding under the carpet, behind the furniture, in the walls. Like unwanted house guests, as long as I kept the refrigerator full. In this case, my veins, they weren't going anywhere. I laughed at the idea of the vampire bugs as some deadbeat relatives mooching off my hospitality, and kept laughing until the answer came to me. My plan was simple but brilliant. I'd go out and buy a bottle of wine and drink a few glasses. Then I let the little shits suck down my alcohol-tainted blood and bring it back to their boss, who'd spit out his spoiled meal, call off his minions, and never trouble me again. If the tactic worked, I could share it with others, and maybe we could start to rid the city, the world, of the bloodsuckers. Sure enough, I found a couple of them on a nightstand the next day. Having them where I wanted, I just smiled. Defiantly, I polished off the rest of the wine along with a double dose of pills. There were a few more on the bedspread the next morning, but I refused to panic. I went out and bought some scotch, took slug from the bottle until I passed out. I woke up hours later and found a spot of blood on my nightgown just above my left breast. Still numb from the alcohol, I watched myself go through the motions of taking off my gown, running cold water over it from the bathroom sink, and dabbing the spot with a paper towel. Then fell to my knees with the futility of it all. It had been stupid to think that the vampire would somehow be put off by my blood alcohol level. For all I knew, it was a treat for him, like a sweet after-dinner Riesling. There was no beating this, no happy ending. Nude and in a daze, I walked out to the balcony, nightgown in hand, and gazed down at the city, yellow streetlights strung out like a garland of fireflies. He was out there somewhere, laughing at me, knowing that I belonged to him, knowing that I knew it too, and there was nothing I could do about it. My chest felt tight, like a mousetrap ready to spring. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I stared at the dark honeycomb windows of the apartment building across the street, wondering if any of them housed my vampire. From a dead calm, the wind picked up. It blew through my hair, whooshed in my ears, almost like someone muttering. I couldn't understand at first. As always, it seemed to come simultaneously from inside my head, yet miles in the distance. The wind died down. I shut my eyes and concentrated. Very close now. The paper-thin voice of an old man rasped. A warning? I couldn't recognize the speaker, but the accent sounded a lot like my Lithuanian client, whose dead husband I'd failed to reach earlier that week. Seemed I'd made contact after all. I stared at the inner wrist of my hand, clutching the blood-spotted nightgown, blue veins branching beneath translucent skin, anesthetized to the fear. Almost here, he said. The dead had no reason to lie, and I was grateful to him for his counsel. I knew then what I had to do. I flung the nightgown over the balcony. It floated to the street below like a white flag of surrender. With both hands, I gripped the cold railing and leaned forward. A buzzing from the bedroom. My cell phone. Automatically, I walked inside, lifted it from the nightstand, and fingered it to life. I had a text and a voicemail. The text was a dimly lit photo of Ariane with an older man. She wore too much eyeshadow, dyed yellow curls piled atop her head in a parody of elegance. Evening gown cut desperately low. The man had a full head of white hair and was dressed in a tuxedo. He looked at something off camera, hand resting on the inside of Ariane's upper thigh. In her voicemail, Ariane explained how she and Gil would be coming back into town that weekend and that she wanted me to meet him. Gil's very generous, you have no idea. I really hit the jackpot. A few seconds of silence before Ariane went on. But he's got these quirks, and part of our arrangement is that I take care of them. So, Ariane sighed. I showed him your picture, and well, he's interested, which is why I need you to do me this one teensy favor, Ian. Disgusted, I flung the phone across the bedroom. Ariane's voice still whining out demand from the carpet. Was she serious? As if I'd ever. A thought jolted me like a cattle prod, and I leaned against the wall for support. Oh my God, it was her. It had been her all along. All the times I'd held that needy little floozy in my arms, consoling her after the latest guy tossed her away like a used tissue. The hours I'd spent listening to her drunken blubbering over the mess that was her life, her fading looks, the wrong choices she somehow couldn't stop making. All the times I told myself she was a bad friend, how she took and never gave back. But the next time she banged on my door late at night, I'd ignore her. But I never had the guts. I always let her in. My neck tingled where I'd been bitten, and I scratched. When I took my hand away, my nails were streaked with red, like a sexy polish. Unable to resist a sudden impulse, I plunged my fingers into my mouth and slurped up the blood. Coppery sweet with a dash of salt, I was horrified to find that I was delicious. I'm not proud of what happened next. I didn't stop. I kept sucking my knuckles like a nervous child, hungry for the taste that had been stolen from me and returned as a dare. The bathroom light hummed. The mirror breathed on its own in the heat. My throat worked around a dry swallow, and I heard the apartment beyond me adjust. Old pipes knocking, a neighbor's TV groaning through the wall, the slow drag of something small across the kitchen tile that I would not look at. I patched toilet paper against the bites, the way you patch a cut after a bad shave. Little white flags on my neck. The paper soaked through, pinking at the edges, then reddening. I pressed harder, like I could shove the blood back where it belonged. Very close now, the old man whispered again, but this time it rode, the buzz of the light fixture, thin as a fuse wire. I flicked the switch. Darkness rinsed the room. The whisper didn't stop. I slept with the ceiling fan churning and the balcony door cracked. Every time the chain tapped the glass, I jolted. Every time the chain didn't tap, I jolted harder. Around 3, I heard the soft, deliberate tick of the torn screen, lifting and settling. Not tearing, not scraping, just moving like breath. I lay there motionless, counted my heartbeats until the count dissolved, and I wasn't sure if I'd reached 50 or 500. Dawn rolled in dirty and indifferent, and I got up with that headache you get when your skull is clenched the whole night. I made coffee. It tasted like pennies. I dumped it in drain tap water, and that tasted like pennies too. I tried to do work, set out the tea lights and the cheap white candles in their glass cups, wipe down the little table where I do sessions, arrange the deck of cards I never admit is just for my hands to busy themselves when clients butter. I thought about the Lithuanian widow with the onion house. I wondered if she'd call, if she'd give me one more chance. I wondered if her husband would answer me now that I'd crossed some private border, now that something other than grief had taken a seat in my apartment. The bugs didn't show that day. Fine, let me have the day. I washed my pillowcases with scalding water. I vacuumed slow, pulling the canister along until the cord snagged and kicked back hot little snaps on my ankle. When I emptied the dustbin, I heard a rattle. Hard grains, not dust, like eggshells crushed to confetti. I looked and saw nothing but gray fluff. I slammed the bin and bleached my hands until the skin itched. I told myself, set a trap. If I couldn't outmuscle a thing made of hunger, I could at least outplan it. I taped double-sided strips along the legs of the bed frame and the nightstand. I spread flour, a thin pale beach, in a ring around the bed. If something crossed while I slept, it would leave prints. Proof. Insult. Trail. Night came down like a lid. I took 2 pills and then an extra because fear talks fast and loud when the lights go. I lay down and pretended to watch TV. Pretended to be bored by a true crime rerun where the killer is always the person who smiles too much at the press conference. I closed my eyes, my mouth filled with the taste of old coins again. A soft weight feathered onto the blanket near my calf. Not heavy enough to be a cat, heavy enough to be in tension. I held my breath until my chest screamed, and then I let it out slow, like a tire trying to make it to the next gas station. I woke up with the sun and went straight to the flower. For arcs, delicate as eyelashes, crossed the circle. The prints were not human and not quite insect. The toes were wrong. Too few or too many, depending on how you counted. The stride was too bold for anything that feared me. I crouched and felt the cool of the flour on my bare kneecaps, and I smelled that metallic breath again, like a key warmed by fingers. I followed the tracks past the bed to the wall socket by the nightstand. The plastic cover was crooked a hair. I touched it, and my fingertip came away white with flour and something sticky. I unscrewed the plate with a butter knife. Inside, behind the wires, the darkness had weight, like a pocket full of sand. The air dripped cool on my wrist. I put my ear close and heard a soft, damp chuckle. I put the plate back and left the room. You think I sound nuts? I know how I sound. You're listening for that exact point where you decide I'm the unreliable one and not the world. But the world had already been unreliable every day of my life. Dead people whispering names I couldn't verify, living people walking out on the promise of coffee next Tuesday, landlords who lost the work orders right after I paid rent. Trust the change when the change is all you've got. That's what I told myself. Ariane called at noon like nothing ugly had ever happened between us. Baby, she sang into the phone, syrup over gravel. Tell me you're not mad about last time. Why do you need me to meet Gil? I said, no hello. She inhaled through her teeth. Because he wants to help you. I don't want his help. You always say that when someone holds out their hand. She clicked her tongue. You push the hand away and then complain nobody's there. It's a pattern. Fuck you, I said. My voice shook and I hated that. You told him about me. Of course I told him about you. I tell everyone about you. You're my friend. Did you tell him where I live? Silence, wide and bright as a camera flash. Then, don't be dramatic. Did you? I said again. I might have said the street, she said, like she was bored of me already. Why are you always making me the villain? Gil is generous. He can pay for your exterminator. He can help you move. He can, how do I say this, resolve things. Resolve me, I said. Is that the gig? She went cold fast. Don't flatter yourself. I wanted to throw the phone again. I wanted to smash it in my teeth and the nightstand and the socket cover and Ariane's lipstick case and everything else that made a clean surface for the truth to bounce off of. Instead, I said, he's coming here, isn't he? Saturday, she said. The word hit my ear and stuck there. We'll knock around 6. We're something pretty and don't be weird. He hates weird. The call ended like a door shutting hard down the hall. I set the phone face down and stared at the little hairline crack running diagonally under the glass. I ran my thumb over it and felt nothing. Some damage you only see. Some damage you only taste. I killed the day in small hard tasks. I taped the balcony screen down with wide bands of duct tape so the torn flap couldn't lift like a tongue. I stuffed steel wool into the crack under the front door so nothing soft could slide in. I rubbed garlic over the inside of my wrist because why the hell not? I'd rubbed worse on worse for men with worse excuses. I ate crackers over the sink and thought of communion, then thought of spit, then couldn't eat anymore. Twilight climbed the building across the street in slow pink squares. I turned on every light. I set out a bowl of salt by the bed and a second bowl under the socket, which looked stupid and perfect, a domestic shrine for an angry god who never did the dishes. I put on music to tame the air. The music made the air hungrier. I sat on the floor and hugged my knees and rehearsed lines I'd never say to Ariane. You broke something in me and you know exactly what. You loved me because I listened and you hated me because I saw you. You sold me. 6 came and slid by. I stood behind the peephole from 6:02 to 6:08 until my eye watered and the corridor light went off and the peephole turned into a dark bubble. I went to the balcony, tried to breathe. City wind climbed into my robe. Horns down on the avenue dragged their tired notes up into the night. A woman across the way watered plants that weren't there. I stood like a statue and told myself, if they don't come, don't go to them. If they do come, don't go to them. If they knock, don't open. At 6:21, One knock, like someone set a ring down on a table. Then another, slow. Not a rhythm, a pulse. I didn't move. Third knock, lighter. Fourth, knuckles on the door, but not on wood. It sounded like the hinges were being tapped from inside the wall. My chest got small. I walked forward because my body decided it could outrun the fear if it kept moving. I put my eye to the peephole. Ariane's hair was brighter than the hallway light. She smiled at something behind me and then mouthed, "Babe?" The man beside her did not look at the door. He looked at the ceiling, head tilted, like he was listening to upstairs neighbors. His suit was dark and expensive in the way of dark, expensive things. The fabric drank light. His hair was white in the way of snow seen through blue glass. He didn't breathe the way I breathe or you breathe. He waited like a cathedral waits. No rush, everything already prepared. I didn't open. I couldn't. I pressed my forehead to the door and said nothing because I couldn't pick a word clean enough to say. Ariane's smile flickered into a frown. She knocked once more. He said something to her without moving his mouth, and she flinched like a dog who forgot about the fence and found it with her teeth. "Tomorrow, then," she said to the door, to me, to the building. Her heels clicked away like metronome ticks. When the corridor went silent, my apartment filled up with a smell like cold pennies and crushed mint. I walked back to the bedroom, and the flower ring had been blown inward like breath had scooped it. In the salt bowl by the socket, there were 3 tiny black flecks that were not salt and not ash and not anything I could name without lying. I dumped the bowl into the toilet and flushed again and watched the flecks cling to the porcelain like they were spelling my name wrong. I didn't sleep. I turned on the oven for heat and left the door cracked and sat on the floor by it. Knees up, arms folded on top. The oven hummed and the pilot clicked in slow, nervous fits. The scent of hot metal and old spills took me back to my mother's kitchen, and for a warped minute, I wanted to call her and tell her a story about my day and listen to her sharp laugh and hear that little shift in her voice where she pretended not to worry about me. My phone was across the room like a trap. I didn't move. At 4, a shiver rolled through the apartment hard enough to rattle a spoon in the sink. I thought earthquake, then thought train, then listened and heard water move in someone else's bathroom. I thought of the Lithuanian husband again, how he'd said almost here like the hazard lights on my life had just started to blink. Saturday morning, I ate yogurt because it was cold and I wanted cold to live in me for a bit. I showered too hot and scrubbed too hard, and when I got out the mirror had fogged over the top half of my face and left my mouth visible, redder than I liked. I put on jeans and a sweater and then changed into a dress that knotted at the waist because fear made me vain and I hate that about myself. I opened a compact and then closed it because what could I possibly fix that would matter in the next 6 hours? At noon, the landlord texted, "Exterminator can't come today." I stared at the words until they looked fake, like someone had drawn them in pencil. I typed back a string of things I can't repeat because they were true in a way that makes you hate yourself for being that true. He responded with a thumbs up. I laughed in the kitchen, a wet bark that startled me. I set the table. Not for dinner, for a session. If he came, if Gil crossed my threshold, if I did something other than collapse, I would do what I always do. I'd ask the dead to speak. I'd call down something bigger than me, and I'd watch the person across from me lose a little of their bravado, lose a little of their armor. I'd aim it like a mirror. Maybe it would work. Maybe that was the only way anything ever worked for me. Force the truth into the room and make the room share it. At 6:03, the corridor light snapped on, and I put my hands on the table as if to anchor. A single knock, then silence so deep I swear I felt the building lean into it. I walked to the door. I put my palm flat to the wood. It was cold. Not winter cold, not freezer cold. Grave cold. I opened. Ariane stepped in fast, breath sweet with champagne, hair piled and pinned like a dessert. She kissed the air by my cheek, already pivoting, already performing. "Don't freak out," she said. "I'm past that," I said. Gil entered like he'd been inside all along and only chose that moment to let me see him. The hall light skated off him. My room's light stopped at his shoulder. He didn't look older up close. He looked finished. He looked like a decision. His eyes were tired in the way of something that had consumed every version of full and found new meanings for the word. "Good evening," he said. The words tugged at the old man's whisper in my head and straightened it up, turned it into a string that hummed correctly. Every living thing in the apartment adjusted itself half an inch. The pilot in the oven hiccuped and found a steadier flame. The ceiling fan ticked once and decided not to. "You're the friend," he said, almost polite. "I'm the one who knows when she's being sold," I said. Ariane rolled her eyes. "God, you make everything so bitter." Gil looked at the table set for a session, and something like amusement crossed his face. A tide leaving a little wet shine on sand, and then quitting. "Please," he said, and gestured to the chair opposite mine. He didn't sit. He watched me sit. I did, because my legs had nothing better to do. "Who are we calling?" I asked, throat dry, voice steady enough. "You tell me," he said. "Your mother," I said, because that is a safe play and because I wanted to see if his jaw would twitch. He smiled a pale, tiny smile that could have been a crack in porcelain. "She's not where I am." "You're first," I said. "The first one who lived." That got the twitch. Ariane looked between us, chewing the inside of her lip, more girl than woman. "Can we not? Go down memory lane? Can we just, Gil, show her what you can do?" He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He looked at the salt bowl under the socket. The bowl emptied itself, grain by grain, a white thread pouring upward into the dark of the outlet until the porcelain shone clean. The apartment held its breath. The crack of my phone's glass fogged, and then cleared as though it had exhaled too. He finally sat. "What do you want?" I said. "To stop wasting everyone's time," he said simply. "Yours included." Ariane laughed a little, relieved now that the show had started. "He's very efficient." "And what does efficient mean tonight?" I asked. "It means," Ariane said, squeezing his shoulder like she was claiming a trophy, "if you just relax, this could be easy." He reached into his jacket and placed something on the table between the candles. It looked like a matchbox at first, then it looked like a pill case, then it looked like neither. I understood when the smell hit. Cold pennies meant that copper tea sweetness. It was a small tin filled with something dark and glossy that quivered like jelly. "Bonbons," I said, mouth sour. He inclined his head. "I prefer the work to be done for me," he said. "You have facilitated." "You send the bat bugs," I said. Ariane made a face. "Don't be gross." "You invited them when you left the balcony screen torn," he corrected gently, as if he were my teacher and I'd almost gotten the answer. "But yes, I prefer appetite to be mutual. It makes everything run cleaner." He nudged the tin. "Paste." I stared at the wobbling dark. I thought of the flower prints. I thought of the old man's whisper turned literal in Gil's mouth. I thought of Ariane's texts asking me to be fun when all I had left was bone. "Go to hell," I said. "We live in the same building," he said, and his smile had real teeth in it this time. I pushed back my chair. It shrieked and embarrassed me. The candles fluttered. The little tin didn't move, but its contents pebbled, as if breathing. The room went out of focus and then sharpened so hard I could see the tiny paste thumbprint in the corner of the matchbox. "Tin whatever." Ariane sighed, heavy and theatrical, like I'd ruined a surprise party. "Enough," she said to me, then to him. "Can you just do it?" "She's impossible." He didn't stand. He simply leaned forward a fraction and the apartment leaned with him, and I realized then the traps I'd set weren't traps at all. They were invitations. The flower circle, the salt, the garlic, hilarious. A table with candles and a chair across from mine. An altar to the very thing I was calling no to. "Take the chair," he said, "or take the balcony." I laughed like a cough. "You want me to jump?" "I want you not to waste anyone's time," he said again, patient. "You made a plan with the wine. Admirable. It did not suit me. You have other plans." I put my hand to my throat. The little toilet paper flags had come off. 2 red punctures like punctuation marks at the end of the sentence I didn't remember writing glowed faint in the candlelight. "Stop," Ariane said, voice tight. "You're making a scene." He hates scenes. "You picked me because you knew I'd fight," I said to her, to both of them, to the little dark in the tin that quivered like a listening ear. "You always pick me for that. You always like the spark, but never the fire." She flinched, and I saw the girl, the one who'd showed up on my door 2 years ago with her mascara down her face and her heels in her hand and the word help buried under a laugh. She swallowed. "Please," she said. It wasn't to me. He looked at me like a portrait looks. He didn't blink. He didn't need to. "Fine," I said, and I reached forward, and for a second I made even myself believe I was reaching for the tin, that I was going to break open and let the world end in my mouth like candy. My hand closed around the matchbook in the drawer. I struck a match and dropped it in the tin. The dark gleamed and then hissed. The air bent. A sound like the inside of a seashell met a scream I recognized as my own only because it hurt so perfectly down my throat. Ariane knocked her chair back, hands over her ears. Gil did not move. The jelly blew itself out like a candle and left a stink that crawled into my nose and clung. He looked at me, not angry, more curious, like a scientist with a misbehaving frog. "Interesting," he said. "Pain, then, is not persuasive enough." "I'm hard to persuade," I said, shaking, hands smarting where the match had spit. "I know," he said, and he stood. The room tilted toward him again. "Let's try honesty." He stepped around the table. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. His breath was clean and old and wrong. "You have been visited," he said. "You have been tasted. You have been found compatible." "I'm not software," I said, but the word compatible made my knees want to bend. "I do not enjoy mess," he said. "Come to me clean, and I will end this in a way that looks like mercy. Fight me, and I will end this in a way that looks like you." "What does that mean?" I whispered, though I knew. "It means you will beg in the voice you use at your sessions," he said, and that was the first cruel thing he did. He stole my work and handed it back to me like a weapon. "Stop," Ariane said again, and this time it sounded like she meant it. He ignored her. He put his mouth near my ear, not touching, breath feathering the fine hair there. "The dead have asked you for many favors," he said. "Ask them one for yourself." "Which one?" I said, because I'm always the student, always the eager candidate, even at the edge of a roof. "Any," he said. "They all end up here." The old man with the onion house leaned into my skull like he was stepping into a booth to whisper a secret. "Almost here," he said without malice. "Almost over." "Fine," I said for the second time that night. But this time I wasn't talking to Gil. I picked up my candle and blew it out. Smoke rose and wrote something invisible in the room. The dead attend smoke. They always have. I closed my eyes and pressed both palms to the table, sticky with spilled wax and fear, and I said the name I should have said at the beginning. "Casper," I said, and my childhood cat padded into the room in that memory fog wait ghost choose. Shape first, wait second, smell last. Wet yellow things writhed where his eyes should be. He rubbed against my shins, and I didn't look down. I didn't need to. The room got colder and smaller and more mine. Gil cocked his head. Not surprise, not respect, calculation. You called a pet. I called the only thing that ever loved me without an angle, I said, and my voice steadied. Ariane made a small sound, not quite a sob. She reached for me, and he caught her wrist mid-air without looking. She stilled like he'd pressed a button in her. "Casper," I said again, and I reached down with both hands, not touching, hovering. The air between my palms and the phantom fur thrummed like a fence line. I pushed, and the fence pushed back, and suddenly I wasn't alone at the table. I was a kid with scabbed knees and a heart too busy for my chest, and a cat who slept on my throat like a scarf. I felt his purr in the rattling oven. I felt his tail tick my calf in the dead ring of flour on the floor. Every bug in the wall stopped moving to listen. "Casper, stay," I said, and he did, because once long ago I taught him that, and he gave me this one gift of stillness. I lifted my hands, and the oven pilot flared clean, and the room sighed. Gil smiled for real then, small and bright and mean. "Little wins," he said. "Do you want a medal or a quiet death?" I looked at Ariane. Her eyes shone like the night we met. She bit her lower lip the same way. "Please," she said, and I heard all the girls in her throat at once. The one who wanted to be saved, the one who wanted to be chosen, the one who wanted to be paid. "Do you love him?" I asked her. She sucked in a breath, like I'd hit her. She glanced at him, and he still wasn't looking at her. "It's not about," she started, then swallowed. "He takes care of things." "Who takes care of you?" I said. She didn't answer. She didn't have one. "Time," Gil said, finally impatient, and the room agreed with him, the clock jumping a minute forward without touching the seconds. "Choose." I chose to stall, because that's my other talent. "Tell me about the first," I said. "The first one who lived." He went still, and then almost smiled, and then didn't. "She asked very nicely," he said. "What did she ask for?" I said, my hands under the table, finding each other and squeezing to remind myself I'm here. "More," he said softly, like he was describing dessert. "And did you give it?" I said. "Of course," he said. "It's all I give." I nodded like we were at a networking event, and he'd offer me a business card. I stood up slow. I stepped back from the table. I felt the room pull at me like honey. I walked to the balcony door and put my hand on the duct tape over the torn screen. "Where are you going?" Ariane said, panic lacing her voice finally. "For air," I said, and I peeled back the tape and slid the glass door. Night leaned in with its mouth open. Gil didn't rush me. He didn't have to. He'd already been here every night for weeks. He knew my balcony as well as I did. I stepped outside, and the city rose up like a choir with its eyes closed. Wind tugged at my hair the way my mother did when she was gentle. I put both hands on the rail. The old man in my ear said nothing this time, and that scared me more than his whisper ever had. I waited. Behind me, the salt bowl in the bedroom cracked with a clean ceramic pop. The oven pilot blew out, and gas took its place with that lazy, ugly bloom. The flour on the floor stirred and drew a shape I chose not to name. Ariane said my name like a question, like a prayer, like gossip. Gil's hand hovered near my shoulder, not touching. "This is tiresome," he said, and for a second I loved that he said it. I loved that my refusal had bored a monster. "You asked for honesty," I said. "Here's mine. I'm not ready to die on your schedule." "Then die on yours," he said. "Not yet," I said. The bat came then. It slipped out from the shadow at the top corner of the balcony where the building made a mouth. It skimmed the rail and made a sound like silk pages turning. It landed on the open skin of my forearm, light as a moth, and I watched its little face tilt, the way a baby tilts when it decides you're not a threat after all. Its wings smelled like wet books. It opened its mouth, and there was nothing dramatic, no movie kiss of fangs, just a needle prick professionalism. I let it. I didn't look at Gil. I didn't look at Ariane. I watched the bat drink what belonged to me, and I counted backwards from 50. At 32, I got lightheaded. At 20, I felt like a leaf torn off a tree, and the part of me that's still practical whispered the word anemia like a nag. At 8, I heard the old man again, faint, not warning, almost done. The bat pulled off, and its body got a little heavier in my palm, and then it flitted upward, hung a second under the concrete lip, and zipped into that mouth of darkness above the balcony. The wind tasted like pennies. My knees shook once, twice, and then I turned around. Gil looked thoughtful, which scared me more than anger would have. "Mutual," he said. He picked up the tin, glanced at the char in it, and slid it back into his jacket. "Tomorrow," he said, like a dinner reservation. 9. "No," I said. 8, he said, amused. I laughed then, because what else do you do when someone reschedules the apocalypse like a haircut? 7, I said to the floor, to the oven, to Casper's rattling purr. He bowed a fraction. "As you wish." They left without slamming, without fanfare. The corridor light died. The apartment grew itself back around me like a scab. I shut the balcony, taped what I could. I lit the oven again and turned it off and lit it again, checking like a maniac. I lay down fully dressed with my arm tingling and my neck humming, and every part of me that had been hollow now ringing with something meaner than fear and sweeter than hope. A plan. I stared at the ceiling and mapped out the next day in terrible detail. The hardware store at 10 when the old guy with the limp is there, because he doesn't hover. The butcher on Maple who will give you a bag of bones for free if you say it's for your dog. The church on Delancey whose candles are ridiculously cheap if you drop a 20 and take a handful like a sinner with a to-go bag. The Lithuanian widow's onion house, her broom, her grief, her husband's whisper. Almost here, almost here, almost here, like an engine catching. I slept for 30 minutes and woke up hard, jaw sore, heart steady. The bat had left a perfect kiss of blood on my arm, and the skin around it had blushed. I showered. I braided my hair like a girl who means it. I taped the sleeves of my sweater at the cuffs, so nothing could run up my arms. I put on the boots with the heavy heels, so if I had to stomp a thing, I'd feel it. At the hardware store, I bought copper mesh and a handful of those old-school door chains nobody trusts anymore. At the butcher, I took the bag of bones and smiled like meat didn't make me gag. At the church, I didn't kneel, didn't cross myself, didn't look up. I just took the wax and left the 20 and told the saint in the alcove that I didn't need his eyes on me for this one. At home, I worked. I shoved copper into every mouth the apartment offered. Cracks, gaps, sockets, vents, until my fingertips went raw and shiny. I strung a chain across the balcony door on the inside, so it would scream if anyone clever got it unlatched. I set the bones on a tray in the oven and roasted them until the apartment smelled like an after-hours restaurant where every table is laughing at you. I melted wax and drove nails through a dozen tiny lumps of it, my hands moving on their own. I wasn't summoning. I wasn't banishing. This wasn't magic in a book. This was the mean, ugly work of telling your space what it is again. Ariane texted at 5. Dress nice. Please don't be a bitch. I threw the phone into a drawer and jammed it with a spatula, so I'd have to really want it to open it again. The oven timer dinged, and I pulled the bones out and let them cool and packed them in a brown paper bag. At 6:58, I heard the corridor light sigh on. I wiped my hands on my skirt. I looked at Casper where he hovered in the flower ring, tail twitching at nothing. I said, stay, and hoped the dead still liked me. The knock came like thunder heard from far away. I opened the door. Ariane stood there alone, hugging her elbows like she was cold, mascara already threatening to run. She smelled like hotel air and sugar. The corridor light laid a yellow chain on the carpet between us. He's parking, she lied, because men like Gil don't park. Can I come in? You're already halfway, I said, and stepped back because my mother raised me on reflexes I hate. She slipped in, eyes darting around like the furniture might grate her. Her gaze snagged on the flower ring, on the copper mesh bulging from the outlet, on the chain across the balcony door, on Casper sitting in the ghost light, a negative shape against nothing. She tried to smile, and it wasn't pretty. You've been busy, she said. You told me not to be a bitch. I tell you lots of things, she said, shoulders loosening with the joke, relief pretending to be humor. You hear the ones you want. Tonight, I hear everything, I said. I shut the door, and the click echoed like a spoon in a jar. The building breathed. The hall light clicked off behind it. Ariane rubbed her arms. Her bracelets clinked. She wore dress the color of a bruise. Are you gonna make this hard? She asked. Yes, I said. Seat. She didn't. She hovered behind the chair like she was a waitress about to take an order. She opened her mouth to say something about me being dramatic, and then the doorknob turned sharply, like a thought finishing itself, and the door cracked, and the smell that has lived in crypts and bank vaults drifted in like a polite guest. Gil did not step over the threshold as if thresholds mattered to him. He slipped through the space like air changing temperature. His eyes did a slow inventory and landed on the bones cooling on the tray, like he'd caught me putting knives in the dishwasher wrong. He smiled without teeth. 7, he said. Punctuality is a kindness. Take it and use it, I said. We'll be done faster. We, he echoed, amused, and glanced at Ariane with the smallest, almost tender boredom. We implies a partnership. Everything you do implies a crime, I said. Ariane flinched. Can we not throw labels around? You labeled me when you showed him my picture, I said. Asset, meal, problem. That's not fair, she said. And the word fair was so ridiculous in the room, it made the candles stir. Gil drifted toward the table. A tiny dark bug, bulged with something wet, ticked across the copper mesh near the outlet and stopped like it had forgotten its line. It moved its small flat body against the wires, found no purchase, reversed like water, turning in a drain. Another bug climbed up from under the baseboard and stalled, antennae stuttering. If I were sentimental, he said, eyeing my handiwork, I would call this touching. Don't strain yourself, I said. You might find a feeling and choke. He glanced at my throat like a reflex. I felt the old paper flags I'd stuck there last night, the sticky tenderness where skin remembered teeth. My stomach turned with the knowledge of exactly where the vein runs, the way it's a road that keeps serving traffic even when a wreck's just happened. Shall we be civilized? He asked. We all want something. The sooner we speak plainly, the sooner we all sleep. You first, I said. He shrugged lightly. You are compatible. You said that already, I said. I wasn't flattered then either. It isn't flattery, he said. It's mechanics. Some rooms echo better. Some mouths fit certain songs. You're a chamber that carries what I need. I tapped the table edge to keep my hand from doing something stupid. You don't drink directly, I said. You're too tidy for that. You outsource appetites. I prefer to let the world come to me, he admitted. Efficiencies of scale. You talk about blood like a supply chain, I said. I hope your MBA burns. Ariane made a wounded sound. Why are you trying to pick a fight? He's offering you something simple. Nothing simple ever followed you through a door, I said. Gil set the little tin on the table and didn't open it. He looked at the bones cooling clean on the tray, at the cheap church candles sweating wax, at the vulgar copper mesh stuffed into my wall like a jaw wired shut. You cooked, he said. Everyone brings something to the party, I said. He nodded once, as if we'd settled the bill. Ariane, he said without turning, go close the balcony door. The draft is unbecoming. She obeyed like a dog who can't help but obey, even when you kick it. The chain I'd strung across the slider chimed against the glass. She glanced at me, at the chain, at the tape, like she'd only now realized she lived somewhere dangerous. Leave it, I said. Let the room breathe. Let her breathe, he said, and that made something hard in me flex. This is how you talk to women, I said. Like they're rooms you paid for. He finally looked at me full on, and it was almost a relief because the air stopped tugging. Show me your plan, he said. You didn't buy copper and nails and bones to narrate them. I took a breath that hurt going in like cold after warm, and I let the nasty part of me stand behind the polite part and drive. You keep your mouth clean by letting other mouths do the dirty work, I said. So I'm going to make the mouse hate you. He watched me in that way that eats a person from the edges. Go on. The bugs are your couriers, I said. They drink me and deliver me. So I season the delivery. I make it something your throat remembers as fire. You tried alcohol, he said, almost gently. It bored me. That was seasoning number 1, I said. Tonight is a marinade. He chuckled. Show me. I picked up the brown paper bag from the counter, the one that sweated fat through the bottom. I shook out bones onto the tray, shiny, cleaned by heat, edges blackened. I took a bottle of cheap vodka and unscrewed it, the plastic cracks stuttering in the silence. I poured a thin ribbon over the bones. The sharp smell cut through the room's sweetness and made Ariane cough. This is not a cocktail hour, Gil said, amused bored again. I took the little paring knife from a drawer. The handle was warm from the oven's work. I nicked the pad of my thumb. The sting was clean and bright, and I hated the little thrill that rose up because my body is a traitor. I pressed my thumb to a bone and watched the red bloom feather into the liquor. I did it again and again, dots of me marking the tray, like a stupid art project from elementary school. When the blood ran more than dotted, I pressed a folded paper towel to steady it, to make it dribble on my terms. "You expect me to eat from your hand," he said, almost kind. "I expect them to," I said, and I set the tray down on the floor, just inside the ring of flour, just out of easy reach of the outlet. "Casper," I said without looking down. "Stay." The air around my ankles thrummed. Something in the wall ticked like a clock in a box. A bug crawled out, and another, and another. They didn't cross the copper. They didn't cross the circle. They skated along until they found the gap I'd left, the one place where my ring of flour had been brushed aside by a calf in the night. They poured through like a dark, flat stream. Their bodies made a sound like a child whispering through lettuce leaves. They swarmed the tray, little flat brown coins clambering over each other, their tiny faces working at the glossy puddles. Ariane whispered Jesus in that way atheists do. Gil inclined his head, fascinated as if I'd presented a new type of ant farm. "They'll drink you," he said. "They always do. And then, they'll come to you," I said, like good little door-to-door salesmen. But this time they're selling the wrong product. I took the candle snuffer and pinched out 3 of the cheap white flames. Smoke wound up in tight little ropes, slipping fast toward the ceiling, toward the vent I'd packed with copper, curling back down like a snake confused at a glass wall. I breathed it anyway. I blew across the tray lightly. The bugs rippled, a brown pelt shifting as they settled deeper to drink. "You think smoke bothers me," he said. "You confuse me with a painting." "No," I said, and my throat went calm. "I think the dead write it." The old man with the onion house leaned into the room like someone who can't help but come when you crack the door. His voice sifted down through the smoke, thin and stubborn. "Almost here. Almost here." I felt the thread tied to the back of my teeth. I took the wax lumps studded with nails and pressed 3 against the baseboard by the outlet, the heads of the nails jutting up like a little steel forest. I took 3 more and pressed them beneath the lip of the nightstand, in a shadow where it meets carpet. I took the last and set it delicately on the tin Gil had placed on the table, like a crown. He watched me do it without moving a finger. His eyes glinted in a way that meant either clever or boring, and I only cared which for the second it takes to hate someone properly. "Is this your spell?" he asked, mocking not quite then, but headed there. "This is my apartment," I said. "Spells don't work so great on people who've paid rent this long." "They work best," he said, and then the bugs began to leave the tray. Stuffed with me and cheap vodka, they turned in slow little arcs and started back toward the outlet that breathes. The first one hit the copper mesh and panicked, tiny legs scrabbling, spines catching. It found the edge, slid along, found the gap where a strand of mesh didn't quite meet the molding, and wedged its small flat body through like a letter shoved under a door. 2 more found it faster, then 10, then a sheet of them. They made a slick, gooey sound as they pushed through, the elegant, hideous teamwork of things that have only one job. The first line hit the nail-studded wax at the outlet and kept going because hunger loves an obstacle. The second line stumbled and rolled and stuck. The third line climbed, stuck their own legs in their dead. The wax warmed under them from their tiny industry. They began to smell like pennies and wet lint. I felt my stomach lurch with victory and nausea dancing together like they'd always been friends. Gil watched, expression flattening to something like admiration, which made me angrier than anything, because it meant he'd been entertained. "You built a sieve," he said. "Lovely. Do you think you've choked off all my miles of plumbing with a handful of nails?" "No," I said. "I think when they get to you, they'll be wrong." He opened the tin without using his hands. The lid rolled back with a chime no metal ever made. Inside, the dark quivered, then rose, then licked the air like tongues that forgot about mouths. I smelled my blood in it from across the table. I tasted the cheap vodka like someone else's giggle. "Almost here," the old man said, louder now, edges crisp, and behind him other voices, not polite, not brave, just there. The dead love a mess because it proves the living were busy. I bent down and lifted one of the bones from the tray with my uncut hand, slick with fat and red. I held it up. The bugs crawling over it shivered in place. I turned in my fingers, and the rune changed, the way a rune changes when you tilt a mirror at night. Angles gone wrong, depth forgetting itself. Casper pressed his ghost body against my calf. Hard enough, I almost stumbled. He purred like a machine, working past its warranty. I met Ariane's eyes. She had stopped pretending bravery. Her chin trembled like a leaf pinned to a windshield by speed. "Tell me you won't let him," she said. "I won't let him," I said. She sagged and then straightened because she remembered the kind of person she was. "You're lying." "I'm improvising," I said. "It never sounds pretty." She took a step toward me, and he snapped his gaze to her, and she froze with every muscle, even the ones at her face, the ones she liked to exercise in the mirror. "You don't need to watch this," he told her. "I do," she said, and the words came out in a language older than stubbornness. He looked almost proud. The first bug, overfed, drunk on me, made it up the wall and into the socket cavity behind the jimmied plate. The second followed. The third. They fell like drops into a throat you can't see. The room waited. The world and the walls moved, a slow swallow. The tin on the table trembled like a heart that had decided to beat faster. Gil closed his eyes like a man tasting a complicated wine. I saw the expression shift. Pleasure, confusion, irritation, curiosity, like a storm front changing faces. "What did you give them?" he asked, opening his eyes. "Good manners holding. Barely. Something that hates you more than I do," I said. "That's a narrow field," he said mildly, though his voice fuzzed at the edges. He put one fingertip to the table, and the wood dented under it like warm bread. "What did you give them?" he said again, and the courtesy was gone. I lifted the bone. Under the vodka and the blood-eyed, smeared a thin paste I made this afternoon by pounding the garlic cloves into a pulp with salt and copper filings and the gray powder I scraped from the raw old iron pipes in the hall by the incinerator. I'd mixed in ash, the cheap church candle ash, yes, but also the ash from the burn match in his tin and the flake of soot that collected under the pilot when it choked earlier. It was not science, and it wasn't magic, and it wasn't folklore. It was a guess made by someone who's had to make guesses that kept no one else warm. "I gave them back the coal you burned to become what you are," I said, not because I knew for sure, but because the words felt true in my mouth like a lie that wants to go to church. "I salted it. I made it small. I taught your name." He blinked once, slow, and in that blink his pupils knocked against something. The bugs coming through the mesh stuttered, then went rigid, little flat bodies going hard as coins. The tin on the table heaved and then settled. Not like breath anymore, but like a belly. "What is it?" Ariane whispered. And he ignored her and stared at the tin like it had told a joke in a language he pretends he doesn't understand. "Dead taste," he said quietly. "You brought me dead taste. You like your meals alive," I said. "So here's a little funeral in each bite." "You think I've never chewed bones," he said, and his smile had too much human in it. "You think I don't carry cemeteries on my tongue." "You carry trophies," I said. "You don't carry friends." Ariane made a sound low in her throat like the girl I met 2 years ago was trying to call from a locked trunk. She put her hand on my arm. "Please," she said. "For what?" I said, and I felt tired the way you feel tired at noon on the day you choose to move everything you own up 4 flights because you won't ask for help. "Don't make him angry," she said, and she hated herself while she said it. "Too late," he said, and his voice was not a voice that belonged in a living room. The lights in the kitchen flickered in a rhythm I recognized from a hospital monitor the day my grandmother went. The ceiling fan chain ticked once, twice, and then hung like a line waiting to go taut. "Casper," I said, and my hand shook. "Stay," I said again like I could hold anything in place with one command. The old man laughed, neat and mean, almost here, almost here, almost here, until his words stacked up and made a tower for breath. Gil's gaze slid to the balcony door. Something moved in the upper corner where concrete met nothing. A soft spill of black poured down like ink from a pen pressed there too hard. The air filled with whispering leathery pages, the smell of a library with its windows nailed shut. Bats. Not a swarm. An instruction. "Oh," Ariane said, and in that one syllable were joy and terror and the relief that comes when the person driving finally admits they don't know where they are. They didn't come for me. Not at first. They poured toward him like he was a cave that forgot to be a cave. He lifted his hand, and the cloud checked mid-flight and split, a river hitting a rock. Half the black stream poured to the socket, the rest to the tin. The bugs kept dragging their full bodies toward the outlet, toward the throat in the wall, toward the place where dead taste waited to kiss a king. The first bat landed on the edge of the tin and lapped at the dark. It jerked back. It shuddered. It made a thin, ugly scream that didn't belong in any forest. Gil grimaced like he'd bitten a lemon. Another bat landed. Another. Then they avoided the tin and went for the wall, their small thumbs braced, their tongues like needles stitching air. The bugs kept coming. The bats kept drinking. The room turned into a factory without a foreman. And he moved. He moved like a man who lunches at the same places every day, and tonight the server is new and clumsy, and everything is getting cold. He stepped past the table, past Ariane, past me. He stepped to the balcony. "Don't," I said, because the word left before I could decide if that was what I meant. He opened the glass, and the chains sang. The city breathed in like it had been waiting on the other side of my life, and wind wrapped itself around the curtains and tugged like a friend. Bats fogged the door and then parted around him, a black mouth eating and letting go, eating and letting go. He stepped out and turned and looked at me through the opening like I was a thing he was selling. "You wanted to see," he said. "Watch. Boast or blessing. Hard to tell with monsters." He put 2 fingers to his own throat, not to the vein, to the voice. He pressed, and the night answered, not with a cry, not with a swarming, but with a hum like power lines miles away. The bats hiccuped and steadied. The ones at the socket pulled back and launched to him, and then stopped midair, confused by the instruction written in the blood they just drank. And then, because the universe is petty and I am not the main character in anything but my own bad story, the oven pilot hiccuped and went out. Gas rolled in the room on soft bare feet. I smelled it and was 6 at the stove with a box of matches and my mother saying, "Don't be clever." I ran to the kitchen anyway because that's what I do, move toward the wrong. I shut the knob and listened to the hiss give up. When I turned back, Ariane was walking toward the balcony like a sleepwalker, arms slack, mouth open like she was practicing sorry. "No," I said and grabbed her wrist, and she twisted, not to get away from me, but because his unseen hand had turned hers. She looked at me, and her eyes were wet and mean. "Let me do this," she whispered, like I was asking her not to breathe. "What is that even?" I started. "He'll spare you," she said, and you could hear that she believed enough to build a life on it. "He'll spare you if you deliver me," I said. "Sweetheart, that's what you've been practicing." She slapped me a stinging high school kind of slap, more panic than pain. I laughed because my body laughs when I should burn bridges or houses. She slapped again, and I grabbed her hand and twisted, and we both stumbled into the table. The tin slid. The bone tray clanged. The nail-studded wax tipped into the flower ring and sat there like a tiny crown fallen off a dead queen. "Enough," he said, and the word cracked the light bulb in the lamp by the couch with the small glass sound of a bead of rain on a window. A bat brushed my cheek, and I tasted dust and library at night. A bug crawled up my ankle, and I crushed it with my nail through the tape of my cuff and felt that obscene little pop anyway. "Okay," I said, and my voice went somewhere calm and small. "Okay." I picked up the tin and held it in both hands. It was heavier than it should have been. The dark moved inside it like thoughts under a scalp. The smell, my God, the smell, it was hospital and church and the inside of a belly button, and I wanted to gag and lick it clean all at once. I looked at Ariane. I looked at him, a shape framed in the balcony doorway with the city trembling behind him. "Make your deal," I said. "Say out loud." He studied me the way people study the part of a painting where the artist changed their mind and left the ghost of a first draft onto the finished thing. "Give it to me," he said. "Give me what you have, and I will not come back." "For how long?" I said. "A season," he said, and his voice was almost kind, the way a judge's voice is kind when he says he's taking your child because you loved it wrong. "Winter," I said, because of course. "You take winter, and I get spring to hate myself." "You get spring to live," he said. I laughed, and it sounded like the time Ariane and I broke a wine glass and called it a music note because we were 20 and nobody had called us bitter yet. "No," I said. "No deal." He didn't look surprised. "Then jump," he said, almost bored again. "It's efficient." I looked at Ariane, and she looked at the tin, and her pupils dilated, and I saw it. There in that second. The future she wanted: a velvet chair, a quiet apartment with no bugs, a card with his name on it, a closet with dresses that pretend to be love. She reached for the tin, and I did the meanest, kindest thing I have ever done. I shoved it into her hands. "Don't," she breathed, but she didn't drop it. She never dropped anything anyone gave her. "Run," I said, and I pushed her toward the door. "Now," I snapped with the voice I use on the dead when they start telling stories that are only about them. "Go." She stumbled, then sprinted, then froze with 1 foot over the threshold because he had not told her she could go yet. I screamed. Not words, something wider, something from a throat that had carried too many strangers. Casper yowled a horrible kitten sound and leapt. A ghost landing where ghosts cannot land, square on her shins, and she moved because old love moves you when new love fails. She ran into the hall, clutching the tin, and the corridor light came on in frantic spasms, and I heard her heels hammer the stairs. Not the elevator, the stairs, good girl, and the light flipped off and the door side shut, hard on the chain. Gil stood perfectly still. He didn't sigh. He didn't blink. He looked at me with a patience that was older than the building. "You think giving my hunger a head start helps you," he said. "She will come back." "She always does," I said. "That's the problem." "You have not saved her," he said. "I don't do that," I said. "I just stall." "You're very good at it," he said, and the compliment made my guts twist. The bats lifted as if a breath under them had been sucked back in. The bug slowed, then moved more confidently, then slowed again, the way traffic concertinas when a driver up front taps his brakes. The room began to smell like copper filings and garlic and vodka and pennies and the sweet undernote of me. I could feel my pulse in my wrists, and my wrists felt like wires. "Come closer," he said. "No," I said. He smiled. I wasn't asking. He stepped forward, and the chain across the balcony door drew itself tight and squealed. The copper mesh in the vent hummed. The wax near the outlet melted a millimeter and took 5 small bodies with it and glued them forever. The oven pilot, traitor that it is, caught again with a hard pop like a hand clap. I held up my hand like a traffic cop, like a mother stopping a child from running into the street, like a fool. He paused anyway, because some gestures are old enough that we all obey them. "You've made your point," I said, and my voice was calm again, the calm that had gotten me out of cars and into apartments and out of jobs and into worse ones. "Here's mine." I lifted the bone I'd kept in my other hand, slick and red and salted with anger. I took the knife and cut my thumb again, deeper this time, and pressed it to the bone and then to my tongue. Gil stiffened in a way only I saw, and that gave me a little rotten joy. I smeared the bone on my neck, the 2 red dots on my jugular, marking the marks, painting the door I refused to shut. I tasted myself and wanted to cry with how much I did. "Fine. Shame can wait." "This is mine," I said. "This is mine." "You don't know how to keep anything," he said. "Watch me," I said. I walked backward to the balcony door, past him, the night on my shoulders like a shawl my grandmother would have knit if she'd forgiven me for leaving. He turned to track me, slower than he should have been, full of dead taste and live refusal, and a night that didn't quite feel like falling in line. The bats clung to the lip of the concrete like notes on a staff. The city below flickered like it had something it wanted to admit. "Jump," he said, gentle now, coaxing the way you coax a child off a play structure too high for their legs. "No," I said, "not for you." He tilted his head, considering the new word I'd made of myself. He took one step closer, and I lifted the bone like a priest lifts a host. "Say it," I said. "Say what?" And he smiled. "My name," I said. "Say my name properly, or you don't get anything." He inhaled to say it and choked, just the smallest itch, because the room was full of smoke again, and the smoke had dead people in it, and dead people don't say my name nice. They say it in the tone of people who had to wait. Almost here, the old man said, not warning this time, not prediction. "Announcement." Gil didn't say it. He closed his mouth, and we stood there, two bad ideas staring at each other across a very small space. From a stairwell, a cry, a curse, a clatter. Ariane's voice loud, ragged. "Take it, take it." A door 3 floors down banged open. A door shut. A voice that was not a voice said, like someone tasting soup that finally came out right. He turned his head toward the hallway, and I did something I don't do. I ran at him. Not to shove him over the rail. I'm not a movie. To get past him. To put my body between his and the door. To make myself a problem big enough, he'd have to spend a minute solving. He caught my wrist. It hurt in a clean way. He didn't crush, he guided. He turned me slowly, carefully, like a music box key. He leaned in, all the manners in the world, and put his mouth near the red I had painted on my neck, and he paused. And he smiled because I am funny, because even monsters like to be surprised. And in that half second where his weight was not on his heels and not on his toes, I did the cruelest, truest thing left. I bit him. I turned my face into his cheek like a lover, and I put my teeth into the thin skin there the way a starving animal tests wire. It was stupid. It was disgusting. It was an insult. It was mine. He jerked, not back, down. His hand on my wrist tightened, and then let go because his body does not like an act written for animals and a language for saints. His cheek tasted like pennies and basement and snow, and that was almost poetry for a stupid second, and then it was just blood. His, mine, ours. He ripped free, and the sound was wet and soft, and I want to rip again because I'm honest. He shoved me, finally ungentle, and my spine met the sliding door, and the chain caught me a second before the glass could. And the chain spit sparks as it tore through its tiny screws, and the balcony mouth opened wide, and the night said hello in a voice my grandmother would not have approved of. I stumbled, caught the frame, caught myself, and he stood in the doorway with his fingers at his face, eyes not angry. Curious. Again, always curious with these men. Interesting, he said, and smiled with blood in his teeth. See you tomorrow. Don't schedule me. I said, breathless, stupid. He stepped backward into the night in a way that should have made him fall and didn't. He didn't turn. He sank. He was gone. The bats loosened their grip and dropped and flowed like a curtain someone tugged. The bugs at the socket stopped moving all at once, a tiny piece of choreography hateful in its beauty. Casper rubbed my shin, and I flinched because I thought I had no tears left, and I was wrong. I slammed the balcony, caught the chain, tied it with tape, copper or prayer. I walked to the door, put an ear to it. The building hummed the way a throat hums after a scream. The stairwell gave back nothing I could use. I went to the sink and washed my mouth until the taste turned into something I couldn't name. I poured vodka on my wrist and on my cuts, and it was theater, and it burned, and I liked the punishment. I lit every candle. I turned the oven on and off until the pilot committed. I sat on the floor and put my hand on Casper where he wasn't and felt him anyway. From outside life, sirens, someone laughing too hard at something not funny, a metal truck sneezing, somewhere down in the concrete hive, a door the color of a bank vault opening on a room that always smells like cold pennies and mint. A girl I loved stepping in because I shoved a tin into her hands and told her to run. I waited because that's what I do better than anything. At 3, my phone, wedged in the drawer with the spatula, vibrated itself loose. It clattered to the floor like an insect trying to become one. I picked it up. One message, Ariane. No photo, no baby doll voice. 3 words, it's almost funny. I typed back, fingers shaking. Where are you? No answer. The typing dots came on, went off, came on. Then, it's easier than you'd think. What is I wrote? Being generous, she wrote. He says thank you. My thumb hung over the screen. I wanted to say you don't have to do this. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I want to say you were my friend, the way a child says door to mean safety. Instead I wrote, tomorrow 7. My place. The dots came and went. 2 minutes. 3. Then, were something pretty. I stared at the words until they looked like someone else's letters. I sat back against the cabinets. I felt a little stupid laugh gather and kept it down because I didn't want to wake the neighbors with the sound of a woman finding herself hilarious in the dark. The dead old man whispered very close, like his mouth had moved to my ear and set up permanent residence. Almost here. Tell him to wait. I said out loud to the emptiness. Tell him I have things to do. He chuckled in my head, in my lights, in my oven. He waits, he said pleased. That's what he does. And you, his voice thinned, sweetly cruel, you stall. Help me, I said, and I don't say that. I made a sport of not saying that. But the old man owes me nothing and owes me everything because I carried his wife's onion grief like a sack of wet cats for 2 hours on a Tuesday and failed to pull him out of the static. For what? He asked, delighted. For tomorrow, I said. And the dead who've been waiting since my first stupid little candle 20 years ago sighed like doors opening in a building I don't own. Casper pressed harder against my shin. Something in the socket caught fire, a tiny clean blue flame the size of a thumbnail, and went out. I smiled because sometimes the world agrees with you in small obscene ways. I slept for 90 minutes with my eyes open. I dreamed with them open. I woke with my blood moving like a new tenant measuring a room. I ate bread dry, and it tasted like the sound between sirens. I taped more copper. I reheated the bones and folded them into wax and nailed the wax into ugly little idols with names I wouldn't say out loud. At 6:55, I stood by the door. My hair was down because I wanted something to give him to ruin. My wrist smelled like garlic and pennies and fear. My throat looked like a sentence I would never finish. A knock, then quiet. A second knock, like the first answer to a question you don't want to ask. I opened. Ariane walked in first, hair glossy, eyes bright with that little tremor I loved and hated. She wore a dress the color of apology. She touched my arm like she'd paid for the ride, and then let go fast like the burn surprised her. Behind her, Gil stepped in, face hole, cheek smooth. He smiled at the place where my teeth had gone into him like I was the punchline to a joke he'd tell in rooms I'll never see. Good evening, he said. We are on time. You're welcome, I said. You got your delivery. He nodded like a landlord counting cash. She ran beautifully, he said, and Ariane's mouth made a little shape like that hurt. She's generous, I said flatly. She is, he agreed, and that was the truest thing he said all week. He sat without being asked. Ariane stayed standing, hands clasped, student before a cruel teacher. I took my chair. Casper curled where my ankles made a shadow and purred, loud enough even the living could have heard it if they were listening. Let's speak plain, I said. Leave when I ask. Leave when I tell you to leave. I won't jump. I won't run. I won't scream. I will keep my mouth off your face. He considered, head cocked, that handsome old dog puzzlement he does so well. Not a deal, he said. A request. Not a request, I said. A rule. And if I don't, he asked. I smiled, showing the wolf my small, blunt herbivore teeth. Then I keep doing what I'm good at. I keep making this messy. I keep you curious. I keep your hunger hating your habits. I salt your favorite meal with memory. You'll get your sips. You'll get your little to-go cups. You'll get your efficient delivery system, but you won't like the taste, and you will think about me in rooms where you don't bring anyone else. Ariane let out a breath that was almost a laugh and clapped her hand over her mouth like she'd broken a rule. Gil looked at me for a long time. Too long. Long enough, I wondered if time feels the same to him, if his minutes are wider, if boredom is his only god. "You're not bargaining," he said finally. "You're declaring." "Yes," I said, "because I'm tired of living in rooms you own." He held my gaze. Something in the socket behind me popped soft and sweet. The oven pilot hissed and held. The balcony chain creaked and settled like a sleeping dog. The dead old man whispered, almost here, and then for the first time, almost over. He stood. 3 months, he said. "Spring," I said. "If you still won't speak to anyone by then," he said, amused again, cruel and bored in everything I hate. "We'll renegotiate." "You don't change," I said. "Ido." He glanced at Ariane and patted the back of her hand like a grandfather at a wedding. She shivered and beamed and looked at me like she could make this better with a joke. "We'll text," she said, and then hated herself for saying it, and then smiled anyway, because we are all stupid where we are soft. "Leave," I said, and my voice wasn't a voice I recognized. It was the old man's broom on onion floors. It was my mother's "don't be clever." It was me. Gil inclined his head in that old cinema way. He turned. He walked to the door. He didn't look back. Ariane stopped in front of me and lifted a hand like she wanted to touch my face. "No," I said, and she nodded too fast and then did. Anyway, she tapped my cheek like a sister or a liar, which we know is the same thing, and left. The door shut. The corridor light clicked off. The apartment exhaled. Casper jumped up into the chair opposite mine, a ridiculous, impossible thing, all bones and memory and purr, and sat like a client. I pressed my fingers to the 2 red dots on my neck and felt the heat under them like words dying to be said. I took a breath. I poured water. I blew out the candles one by one and watched the smoke write letters I couldn't read. I stood, turned off the oven, retaped the chain, pressed the copper, checked the mesh, smoothed the flower ring with the heel of my hand. The phone buzzed once. I ignored it. The old man whispered a thing I didn't catch. I sat on the floor and leaned my back against the couch and let my head rest, heavy on the cushion. I opened my mouth and tasted pennies and salt and something else. Spring. I'm not clean. I'm not saved. I'm not done being afraid. I'm not done being delicious. I don't know what I am, but I know this. Tomorrow will come. He will wait. I will stall. The dead will keep their promises the only way they know how. By standing in doorways, by whispering my name when no one else can say it without making a face, by telling me when he's almost here. I closed my eyes, and the building made the soft, old sound of people turning over in their beds, of pipes clinking, of a city deciding not to eat itself tonight. I slept like a person who has struck a stupid deal with a saint and a snake. I dreamed of Casper's weight on my throat, of garlic blooming white in a window box I never planted, of a tin that stayed shut because someone had finally learned how to hold their own mouth closed. Morning will make this all look ridiculous. That's fine. Ridiculous is a kind of armor. I got up, washed my face, and set another place at the table. I'm not expecting anyone. That's the point.